disclaimer. The views of the guest and even the host sometimes are not necessarily the views of the Work With Me podcast and Ruse advisors.
Welcome.
Work. The interview. Preparing for the interview. Picking your final candidate. Going over the offer. On-board training. Being let go. All things work-related from the employee and employer side are fair game here at the Work With Me podcast. Interact with us at workwithmepodcast.com. Email us at bob@ruseadvisors.com or Larendee at ruseadvisors.com. This is Larendee Ruse. Your slacking employee is Bob Stei, and the fun starts now. And congratulations to us. This is podcast number 20. So if you're playing TV terms, this is our third season, and we love doing this for you every week. It's the Work With Me podcast. Bob Stei, Larendee Ruse. KKNH, where classic rock lives. TakeRadio.com. WorkWithMePodcast.com. And next week, there'll be some new people, some new folks listening to us for the first time. Some are going to be listening to it today. So our network continues to grow, and we can't thank you enough. Reach out to us, Bob at ruseadvisors.com, Larendee at ruseadvisors.com. Another big special thing today is this is Larendee's first broadcast since moving to Los Angeles. So when we get to the interview, it's going to be exciting. East Coast, West Coast, and we are going overseas to Ireland today. Got a lot going on, my friends. You see why you listen to this? Today we're going to hook up with Gerard Quinlivan. I think I said that right. Gerard Quinlivan. He's from Campbell Rockford in Ireland. He's another recruiter, so we have a lot to talk about him about recruiting and, of course, recruiting over there in Ireland and his exciting life. And big thanks to my friend Mark Stiles, who was on last week from Stiles Executive Search and Blakeation in Nova Scotia. So we do have the best guests, and we really do enjoy this show. So Larendee will be joining us from the City of Angels in a few minutes. And this is the Work With Me podcast with Bob Stei and Larendee Ruse. So with her starting her new adventure in Los Angeles, I decided today I would share you a story about my last time in Los Angeles, which was around this time, 30 years ago this year. It was actually, I believe, February or March. My first internship I did was wonderful. I had two wonderful internships in college. One was at radio station WNEW-FM in New York, which I loved. And the other, when I went to school in Baltimore, was at a place called the Maryland Film Commission. They came to my college to tell us about their companies, sort of like a special guest. And what they do is they promote the state of Maryland for companies to come and film here. You know, a lot of movies have taken place in Baltimore. So I cornered the guy when we left, and I said, "Hey, you looking for interns? Got an internship coming?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." He gave me his card, and a few weeks later, there I am. During the internship, I did like a few assignments here and there. It was very relaxing, but it was just a nice bunch of people. And on our last day, we were getting all ready for them to go to Los Angeles for the big trade show. And I said to them, "I'd like to go." They said, "Yeah, book yourself a ticket. Join us out there." So I joined these guys out in L.A. for like 4 days, and I had a blast. I'm 19 years old, and I got the world at my feet there. So here I am, this young little spunky kid from Baltimore at LAX by myself with my suitcase, take a cab to the hotel, and I went to these conferences every day with these guys, and it was so much fun. There were all these trade booths with people from all over the country. Some places would shine your shoes, or they'd give you food from their state, and at night we'd go to these exquisite events. And it was a blast. I mean, the one thing I learned was to get from Los Angeles to West Hollywood could take up to 3 hours sometimes. So the final night was this big, big event. I don't remember if we were thrown in, if we were invited, but it was this big gala, which I had a blast at. And I am sitting at a table. Now, back then, remember, I'm not working in radio. I don't really know much. I haven't met any famous people at that date. So I'm sitting at a table with, back then, before I was a complete vegetarian, my big bowl of Maryland crab soup. And this pretty woman walks by, introduces herself, shakes my hand. She's from Annapolis, so we're talking about the company, and she brings her husband. And her husband sits down, who game show host, Pat Sajack. Now, if you listen to the podcast, if you know me, I am a game show junkie, especially 70s and 80s. So I'm starstruck. I'm like, oh my God, that's Pat Sajack from Wheel of Fortune. So I went over and I stuck out my hand like, "Hey, Mr. Sajack," and he went, "Hi." And then a few minutes later, his wife introduced us. He goes, "Yeah, I met him. like real cold. Like this guy did not want to talk to me. And I've heard he's not the nicest guy too. I will say this to his credit. The day I met him, I believe was the day or the day after his ill-fated TV show was canceled. CBS gave Pat Sajack a talk show to compete with Johnny Carson and Jay Leno and David Letterman, and it was a flop. So I guess if I'm meeting somebody the day I lost my talk show, I wouldn't be too happy either, but it was such a wonderful time in Los Angeles those few days, and I felt on top of the world, so hopefully we'll have better experiences with the celebrities out there, but I'm very excited. We're going to dial into Larendee in Los Angeles. We're going to dial into Ireland as well, and let's get things started.
This is the Work With Me podcast at workwithmepodcast.com.
All right, we are joined now by our wonderful co-host, Larendee. How are you today, Larendee?
I'm fantastic, Bob. Thank you for helping be a part of this again. We have such great fun every week as we do this podcast. So thank you.
Now, we got a little history going into the podcast today. A bunch of major news. Obviously, first of all, the United States of America has a new president.
Well,
Secondly,
president-elect.
President-elect, they call it, yes.
President-elect. And it depends on who you believe.
I know. It's so stupid, the whole thing. Now, weeks ago, I changed the intro of our show because it ended by saying live from Philadelphia and New York. But now, for the first time ever on our podcast, live from the Los Angeles region. How are things going in La La Land already?
Things are going great in La La Land. It's beautiful. The energy is incredible. Walks are amazing. So, yeah, we're doing really well. Thanks, Bob, for asking.
Great. So we're going to put Los Angeles on our map. See, we have a big map here wherever our guests are, and the map is falling apart. We don't have all the corners up yet. But we had a good thumbtack here today because our guest is coming from Ireland, Gerard Quinlivan, and he's with Campbell Rockford as a marketing director. How are you doing today, Gerard?
Really good, Bob. Honored to be your guest on your podcast.
Oh, the honor is ours. And for those of you in Radio Land, you are listening on 102.3 HD2 KKNH, where classic rock lives. TakeRadio.com. And really, Work With Me podcast. You can download some of the podcasts as well. We have some more affiliates coming soon. I have all the blackmail photos. And once I send it to them, we are going to be stocked. Now, you are our first guest. And I have all the blackmail photos. And once I send it to them, we are going to be stocked. Now, you are our first guest from the beautiful country of Ireland. So please tell us about your upbringing and your time at the University of Limerick.
Sure. So I'm originally from a small village in East Clare. That's in the Midwest of Ireland. I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm one of four. You're right, I went to the University of Limerick. I attended there to study business and Japanese for 4 years. Majored in marketing. Never worked in that space, but subsequently graduated, and I came out of there with a degree in business and marketing with Japanese, which I used a little bit when I graduated. Growing up in Ireland, as I said, I grew up on a dairy farm. It was very rural upbringing. The town I grew up in is quite small. You're talking about 150, 200 people. It's minuscule in US terms, but one thing I would say that my upbringing taught me was that it gave me a very strong appreciation for the value of things and a very pragmatic work ethic that was instilled in me from a young age by my parents and still is to this day. And thankfully, they're both still with us. So, so from there, I went to the University of Limerick. And I think what I should probably share with you, Bob and Larendee, for those people listening, is that Limerick is the third largest city in Ireland. But again, to put it in context, Limerick, population-wise, we're talking about 350,000, 400,000 people. It's, again, in US context, it's a tiny, tiny city. But the university I attended was different. And what was different about it was that it was a very intensive university, and that your degree program over a 4-year period, you had 3 sets of exams. You might study 6 subjects per session or per trimester. And what it did was it forced you into a scenario where you had to be constantly on top of your game. It wasn't like university where you got to go in and I can use my sisters as a reference point, where they went to a different university where they had one exam to study for in that year, and then they basically relaxed for 9 months, and then they crammed for 2 months to pass their exams. Limerick wasn't like that. Limerick was you had an exam every 14 weeks. So it was quite intense. The pressure was always on. You had to achieve a certain QPA or QPR score in order to maintain your place in the college. And I found that I probably academically wouldn't have been very strong, but I had enough smarts and wits about me to know what I needed to do to get through it. So so I came out of there in Japanese. Never worked in marketing. Used Japanese a little bit because I got to study Japanese for 4 years. I actually spent 6 months living and working in Tokyo. So as a young student, that was quite an eye-opening experience. But developed a great fondness for Asian culture, for Asian cuisine in particular, and subsequently traveled a little bit around Asia. And so that's a little bit about my background.
Fantastic. So it looks like your interesting career started you out in sales and then breaking into recruiting like 20 years ago. Tell us about your career and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I honestly can say I fell into recruitment, and I know a lot of people say that, but I left college. I worked for a period using my Japanese language skills, but knew that I didn't really want to spend my life working in a Japanese company. So I just spend my life working in a Japanese company. So I decided to try sales, and I've got to be honest, I started out in a sales job. It was zero training. It was selling packaging. Print and packaging was my first sales job. And there was literally no training. It was a case of there's your phone, there's your car, and there's the golden pages or the yellow pages, as you might refer to them in the States. Go and make some sales. And it was literally sales 101, bootstrapping from day one. And I have to admit, I was a horrible salesperson. I had no training. I had no technique. I had no formal idea of how one should go about introducing yourself to a sales prospect, prospecting a client, developing your pitch, and actually closing a sale. So consequently, a year later, I found myself out of work. And how I fell into recruitment, very simple ahead. Maybe I should give this a go because I think I'd be good at it. And then a very good friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, who's now a director in another recruitment firm in Australia, said to me, I really think you're missing a trick here. I think you should give recruitment a go because I think you'd be quite good at it, and you're certainly a good talker. So I started out in sales recruitment. I started recruiting salespeople for a firm in Dublin. Again, no training, literally in the bull ring. With a number of other recruiters, and it was really dog eat dog because I'm sure you guys have seen Glengarry, Glenross. It literally was the fastest on the draw for the best candidates that came in, got the placement. So it was a real baptism of fire. And then I spent a year at that, but towards the end of that year, the first year in recruitment, I formed the idea that I really wanted to get out of Ireland. So I decided to go traveling with a couple of friends. I formed the idea that I really wanted to get out of Ireland. So I decided to go traveling with a couple of friends. And we went to Australia. And I landed in Sydney, Australia, 2 days before September the 11th in 2001. And I interviewed with a firm the morning after the September 11th attacks. And I can remember it vividly because I can remember obviously where I was at the time. And 3 hours into the interview, which I thought was for an administrative role, I realized this isn't an admin role. This is a recruitment position they're hiring for. So I fell into a recruitment job there on a temporary desk, recruiting Irish accountants into the Sydney market. Didn't particularly enjoy it, didn't particularly like it, but the training was pretty good, and the people I worked with were phenomenal. And I had the sheer good fortune to take on an existing desk, replacing another recruiter who left the business. I vividly remember the conversation with the managing director at the time. I was quite upfront with him, and I said, look, I know nothing about insurance. Why are you picking me to work in this desk? And he said, no, that's okay. He said, the other guy didn't know anything about insurance either. And he was like, you'll pick it up. So I literally took on that desk and spent about 3 years growing it. had a phenomenal time in Sydney. I mean, really loved working and living in Australia. It's a really loved working and living in Australia. It's a really, really nice climate, a really nice culture to work in. But the draw to come home to Ireland was always there. I'm first and foremost, I'm Irish, and my family are here, and my connections, my roots are very deep here. So yeah, I spent about 3.5 to 4 years in Australia. Came back to Dublin in 2005, and just kind of got back on the hamster wheel with a couple of recruitment positions with some fairly significant firms here in Dublin. Morgan McKinley being the main one, where I spent 6 years developing an insurance desk for them. And then I see everything changed in 2010. I got married and I turned 40 that year, and I started to think that maybe there was life beyond the agency recruitment positions that I'd had. And you know, rather than fast forwarding through 2006, 2007, which you may have heard of, you know, when you literally couldn't but fall over placements because there was just so much movement in the market. But in 2010, I was exhausted, and I literally came to a point where I said, okay, I want to do something different. And a good friend of mine had left the business a few months before me and had joined Google. And she, over a couple of cups of coffee and conversations, had said to me, you know, I think you should try Google. It would be really good for you. And it would be a good change of pace from insurance. So I had what I call an early midlife crisis. I went off to work for Google for 8 months. Have to be honest, wasn't the happiest experience of my life. I didn't really enjoy it. Google wasn't at all what I expected. I very quickly discovered that, you know, I'm not at all concerned or enamored by the algorithms that go on behind my Google search engine, or indeed what it takes to turn on my PC, in the morning. Once my PC turns on and once I can work it, I'm really not that IT savvy or that IT enamored. So I left Google. I worked a couple of other internal recruitment assignments as an in-house recruiter, but gradually the draw came back to go back into agency. And my final position was with an agency called CPL in Dublin. Now, CPL are a phenomenally successful business. They've recently just been sold by their owners to a Japanese outsourcing firm for something like 310 million euro. But they were just a massive Irish operation, and I was responsible for a small, tiny insurance desk there. But gradually, over a period of about 1.5 years with them, it started to dawn on me that I really wanted to do something for myself, and this itch was growing all the time to get out doing something for myself. So effectively, that's how Campbell Rochford was born in September 2014. I launched Campbell Rochford, my own solo operation. I had built up enough credibility and enough contacts over the preceding 10 years to know that I knew the insurance market. And essentially, Campbell Rochford is my own solo operation. I have some research people that work with me on a consistent basis, but effectively for the last 6 years, I've been flying solo.
Well, it's amazing because for you and I who've talked a little bit but don't really know each other well, how many similarities we have in our life here. First of all, like you, I was born in 1970. So we're the same exact age. Like you, my first quote-unquote real job out of college involved, now this is me dating myself, selling long-distance phone services, business to business, where yes, I had a phone book in front of me and they said, go get it. And to really date myself, when I got promoted there, I left the yes, I had a phone book in front of me and they said, go get it. And to really date myself, when I got promoted there, I left the business to business to sell pager services. So I've worked in a few industries that no longer exist. I've worked in a video store, record store, and sold long distance business to business. Like you, I did fall into recruiting randomly. I was in between positions. I had a resume up at Monster, and a company said, he's got some radio experience. He'll probably be good on the phones. And here we are, like 17 years later, I'm still doing it. Now, before I hand things over to Larendee, I'm looking at your LinkedIn account right here. There is something here. Now, is this a rumor or is this true that you have black belt certification?
No, that's true. I have black belt certification, but I have to be honest, it's not in karate. It's not in any form of martial art. So I completed a course in Boolean search a number of years ago. And at the end of that course, they honored me with a black belt in recruiting search or in Boolean search. And I actually go under the title of recruitment ninja now.
Now, do people challenge you to fights not knowing that you're basically just whipping up search engines, that you're not really hurting anybody?
I'll be honest, Bob, I'm a lover, not a fighter, and I don't hang around long enough to find out if I can fight or not. So, no, I've never discovered that.
Gerard is joining us from Camel Rock from the Work With Me podcast, 102.3 HD2 KKNH, where classic rock lives, TakeRadio.com, and the Work With Me podcast.com. And now, from outside Hollywood, it's Larendee Roos to continue the interview. Hello.
Thank you, Bob. Gerard, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today. So I want to go back to something you were talking about, and that is Ireland has, as with many countries, has had some economic challenges over the years and really over the last 15 to 20. So how has been, you've been in the recruiting industry for a long time. How have you ridden that wave of those economic ups and downs from a recruiting perspective?
Great question. I think very simply, I think you could track the successes and the failures of my career almost in tandem with the success and failure of the economic scene in Ireland over the last 20 years. So I mentioned earlier the Celtic Tiger years. So Ireland went through a period from about 1990 until about late 2007, 2008. So that's 18-year period where we just had phenomenal economic growth. A lot of it was built off the back of a booming construction industry in Ireland, but then also a lot of incentives offered to multinationals, tax incentives to come in and set up in Ireland. So we still have a very, very competitive, globally competitive corporate tax rate of 12.5%, which goes down very well, as you can imagine, in the White House. But we because of that, we attract a lot of inward investment. Now, I think, to answer your question, over the years, I would say that a lot of my peak years in recruitment mirrored the peak years of the Celtic Tiger era. So I always like to think as recruiters, we're about 6 to 12 months ahead of the curve in terms of knowing what way the wind is going to blow. Now, I can't say that, honestly, any of us would have predicted the year that we've just had. But knowing that the market and seeing the cycles of the way that they've gone over the last 20 years, it's obvious to me, as I'm sure it is to you guys, that whenever you go through a period where you have tremendous success and tremendous turnover and tremendous fill rate, that at some point that's going to come to the other side of the cycle and there's going to be a dip. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So I've had some tremendous years in Ireland where recruitment has been phenomenal. I've seen companies come and go. But the one thing I would say about the recruitment industry here is that in a global context, it's quite small. But what has happened over the last number of years is throughout those boom and bust cycles, some of the smaller firms that survive those bust cycles have become phenomenally stronger and have grown as a result of their ability to get through and ride that wave. So, I can point to several examples of ex-colleagues of mine that went out on their own, set up businesses, grew their teams, went through periods of struggle, but then once they got through that period, came out the other side far stronger. And I'd like to think that that's what's happening right now, that 2020 is really a test for all of us collectively, globally, and that bluntly, if we can survive this, I feel confident we can survive anything, all of us collectively, globally, and that bluntly, if we can survive this, I feel confident we can survive anything.
It's interesting how you talked about that as a recruiter and in the recruitment industry, we can kind of see cycles and predict cycles, kind of like maybe a little bit even better than the weather person. And this is when you really know that you're in a trusted advisor role. And it's one of the reasons that any company who's growing really should have a strong recruiter on their team, right? An outsourced placement agency that's seeing, that while you're in the business of growing your business, we're in the business of helping you see employment cycles and, staffing and human resource cycles that you may miss while you're doing whatever it is you're doing, growing your insurance business or your accounting business or your manufacturing business, whatever this is. So to have someone like yourself, Gerard, on the team as a trusted advisor in this regard.
Absolutely, Larendee. I couldn't agree more. I think, no more than you wouldn't go out and be your own legal counsel. I think a lot of the mistake and part of the dysfunction I see in a lot of companies here in Ireland is that sometimes clients think that they can outsmart the recruiter and think that they can do your job better than you can. And no more than, I often say to clients, no more than, Mr. CEO, I could go in and do your job, or I could pretend I'm an insurance underwriter and assess a risk. I'm sure that you can't, with respect, do my job. But I think that touches on something you mentioned earlier about the trusted advisor piece. I think one of the really phenomenal things I've seen over the last number of years in Ireland is that when you do identify a client where you do have that trust and that level or that element of them trusting you as a true partner, that's when you see the true nature of the value you can bring to them, as opposed to the commodity version of, and I think I've heard somebody describe this before as, the bounty hunter that slings enough CVs to see what sticks. I've spent consciously the last 6 years with my own business, particularly trying to move away from that image of recruitment of a temporal state that, companies must suffer through while they need an opening filled. And then once the opening is filled, it's like, okay, thank you, see you later. That's not what the nature of, I feel personally very strongly, I think the true nature of the relationship with the recruiter is very much as a talent acquisition partner, somebody that you can use almost as, yes, a weather vane of and a barometer of what's going to happen in terms of the economic cycles, but also somebody that can truly attract the right type of individuals and collective talent that you need for your organization.
That's so true. So I would love to pivot for a moment. So you've recruited internationally. I appreciate your story too of growing up on the dairy farm. I also grew up in a very small community, and I did not grow up on a farm, but we had a garden, and there were rows to till and there were rows to till and plant, seeds to plant, weeds to pull, and then there was the harvest. And I think that growing up in that environment really does help you see the hard work, but also the benefits of what that hard work produces, because you have a physical manifestation of that work. So what are some of the differences, if there are any? What might people be surprised about attitudes or standards in Ireland compared to other developed countries, if there are any differences?
I was thinking a lot about this question. I can't say that there are any marked differences. My experience of recruiting internationally into Europe and into London in particular, and somewhat from interactions with the US, there's far more in common. We have far more in common now as a global community from a financial services perspective, from an IT and technology perspective. We far more in common now than we did 20 years ago. So maybe by contrast, if I started out, when I started out in recruitment, email was in its infancy. We used to fax our CVs, our resumes to our clients. I can remember literally running up the street with a bunch of CVs under my arm to shove them in the letterbox of a client's door at 5 p.m. on a Friday evening, just to make sure that I got them in before the deadline. And I'm sure we could all speak to that type of experience, but I certainly don't think that there's a lot of difference really here now. I think we're part of a global community. I think that our attitudes towards how we do business are very similar. One thing that might surprise towards how we do business are very similar. One thing that might surprise people to learn about Ireland is that despite our relatively small size, and we were talking about a population here of about 5 million people, we consistently produce, in European context, and perhaps in a global context, we consistently produce some of the highest caliber graduates in the English-speaking world that don't just, settle for utilizing their qualifications in Ireland. We have for millennia being known as a country that believes in sharing our knowledge and our skills globally. And I think that one thing I've seen over the last 20 years is that global diaspora has grown, that the amount of graduates that actually in proportion that stay in Ireland versus those that go overseas and develop their skills and knowledge in some foreign country. Huge. And I'm a huge believer in that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I definitely think that from a best practice perspective, I'd like to think that we're as good in Ireland at what we do as any other country in my experience.
One of the things that you spoke about was this global the global humanity. And I know, in the US, we just are still kind of in the middle of some election drama. And one of the things that has really struck me is how whenever a country has something monumental like an election going on, the world is watching, not just US elections, but, internationally, we're all kind of paying attention to, and that's just one example of how we're paying attention to what others are doing. And I find it to really be an exciting time that on a global level, we can come together and like you talked, friends, and it's sometimes our attachment to try to figure out what those differences are that keep us kind of separated. I really appreciate we talked about the collegiates that are graduating and the really brilliant minds. And I think that one of the things I know in the US, again, coming out of several years of where we're really trying to focus on our differences instead of what makes us common, that what you just spoke to is that tapping into the learning and the education that college students in Ireland or, the UK, the US, Europe, wherever, Africa, wherever it is, that bringing those minds together, those learnings together, the growing up experiences, we as a humanity can really come together and do some incredible things. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, that all of us have something we can contribute. And as a world, as a humanity in general, how much better could we be? And how much more of a difference could we make if we all came together and were willing to learn from one another and take your unique experiences, your growing up and your education experiences coupled with mine, coupled with Bob's, coupled with world leaders. And there really isn't a problem that we couldn't solve if we really had that kind of openness.
Absolutely. Case in point, Larendee, Pfizer just developed that vaccine. I know that some of the research for that particular drug was done here in Ireland because we've got a huge presence for Pfizer here. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, contrasting it with 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I left, contrasting it with 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I left college, we had a huge problem then in that the government perceived that there was a brain drain because all our brightest and best were leaving the country and taking all of that talent and all of that knowledge with them. I think now we've grown up as a country, we've modernized, and I think we now come to recognize that brain drain as we thought of it back then was actually a really good thing for the country in the sense that those people went away to other countries, they gained skills and experiences that they subsequently came back, and I and other recruiters benefited from that enormously because, bluntly, they brought skills back with them that otherwise wouldn't have been available to tap into in this country. So we certainly like to think as a country, we punch well above our weight when it comes to spreading our knowledge and sharing ideas globally. So, if we can contribute in some small way to that, then we're happy to do.
So brilliant. So, Bob, we've kind of meandered a bit off topic, as often happens here on the podcast. But I feel like it's been a very timely, fruitful discussion. And for me, my takeaway from today is for all of us to continue to sow into our roots and to sow into our expansive consciousness, our expansive energy, so that we can all come together as the human race to make a big difference and to preserve what all of us hold dear to us. And that's our friends, our family, and the world. So thank you so much, Gerard. It's been such a pleasure to spend time with you today.
Likewise. Thank you.
So Bob, take us to that desert island that you like to do.
Sure. Now, one difference I will notify is I grew up in suburban Baltimore, and I was not on a dairy farm. So if you put me on a dairy farm, everything's going to be a disaster. I'm going to be trying to milk a chicken or something.
Because you know how to pull it off the grocery store shelf, then everyone's doing their part. So it's 100%. Gerard's going to be stranded on an island somewhere, and you're going to help us have fun with this. So go ahead and take it away.
Sure. And then I got to ask Gerard, those being on a dairy farm in Ireland, is it you or is it England that makes the milk for those Arrow candy bars, which are the best things in the world? Is that England or Ireland?
I have no idea. I've never heard of those particular candy bars. Is it called Arrow candy bars?
AERO. They were all over London both times I've been there.
Arrow. Yeah. I don't know, because that's a Nestle product and that's made in Switzerland as far as I know.
Thought that was a British thing.
Inquiring minds want to know. We better figure that out.
Now that I know you like Arrow, Bob, I'll see if I can rustle up a couple for you and send them across, okay?
The kids would love it. Thank you.
Sure.
So now we're going to put you on a stranded island, and you can have only one of the followings: one food or one cuisine to eat. What would it be?
Really tough one. I have to fall on chicken katsu curry. It's a Japanese dish. I make it sometimes for my kids, and they love it, and I love it too. So yeah, chicken katsu.
That's definitely the most original answer we got. We love it. One book to read over and over.
Again, a difficult one. Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I've read it about 5 times, and I just get something different from it every time I read it.
Really a good book for sure. Absolutely.
One movie to watch.
One movie to watch. I really labored on this one. I've decided in the end that the one movie I would want to watch repeatedly over and over was Saving Private Ryan, because some of it was filmed. The opening sequences were filmed in Ireland, in County Wexford. And it was a big deal for us at the time to win that movie. And Spielberg came across, and Tom Hanks, and the cast and crew that they had assembled was phenomenal. So yeah, Saving Private Ryan.
One TV show or series to enjoy over and over.
So yeah, Saving Private Ryan.
One TV show or series to enjoy over and over.
Yeah, again, in keeping with the Spielberg theme, I really, over the years, I've found every year around this time of the year, I've always fallen back into watching Band of Brothers. I just love that show. I thought it was just a really, really terrific TV show.
And one musician or band to listen to over and over. They can even come to the island if you want.
Oh, that's easy. Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam.
I love Pearl Jam.
But you have that great group out of Ireland, Coors.
The Coors, yeah. Really? I have the distinction, Larendee, of being locked into a HMV with the Coors one time in Limerick.
Really?
University. Yeah. But funny story, I was locked in and I was in there, didn't know they were doing a signing for one of their CDs. And I wanted to get out of the store when there was hundreds of people trying to get in. And the security guys, I joke about it. I was locked into a record store with the Coors, and I wanted to get out.
That's so funny. Who would have known, right?
Yeah, well, there you go. You know, the foolish misspent youth. You know.
And Gerard, where can people get in touch with you for their recruitment needs?
Easy. So they can reach me on Gerard at campbellrochford.ie. I'm also on Twitter, Gerard Quinlivan, and I also have another Twitter handle, which is Campbell Rochford.
Well, great. It was a lot of fun talking to you today. Thanks for spending time with us on the Work With Me podcast. We appreciate it.
Likewise, Bob. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Work With Me podcast with Bob Stei and Larendee Ruse. Original score by Mark Ruse. The show has been edited and produced by Bob Stei. If you have a comment, would like to advertise, be a guest or an affiliate of the Work With Me podcast, email bob@ruseadvisors.com. Copyright 2020 Ruse Advisors.